Good evening, everyone. Today I would like to talk to you about mental health and more specifically the link between mental health and violence. My speech will begin now. Mental health can be something of a touchy and sensitive topic. We generally don't like to talk about it much. And as several psychiatrists have pointed out, when we do, we tend to not do it well. Mental health stigma is a real problem, and it manifests itself in the way we talk about it, even in the very expressions and words we use. This is crazy. Have you gone completely insane? You're nuts. All of this isn't surprising, especially if you think about the fact that up until 50 to 60 years ago, we still had asylums in place to treat people with mental health conditions. In the not-so-old days, asylums were also called custodial mental institutions, and the term custodial immediately makes me think of jail, which contributes to fueling a narrative of mentally ill people portrayed as dangerous individuals to be locked up in a cell and kept away from the population. I believe this is an indicator of the extent to which discourse around mental health is saturated with stereotypes and misconceptions. But perhaps the clearest and most worrying sign of just how little we are willing and prepared to talk about mental health is that one of the only times this topic is actively brought up is in the aftermath of a violent killing. It seems there's nothing like a mass shooting to suddenly spark political interest in mental health. Most likely as a means of steering the conversation away from gun control, especially in the US. In the days following the tragic school shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut, in December 2012, the US media diagnosed shooter Adam Lanza with schizophrenia. Was Adam Lanza an undiagnosed schizophrenic? Asked Psychology Today. Lanza's acts of slaughter strongly suggest undiagnosed schizophrenia, was the comment from the New York Times. In Newtown, Lanza killed 20 children and 6 adults with a military-grade semi-automatic weapon. It seems totally understandable to think, who, if not an insane person, would do such horrifying things? And yet, the notion that mental illness is the reason behind a mass shooting is way more complicated than it actually seems on the surface. Let's see why. Surveys around this topic have shown that there are 2 central assumptions that frequently arise among the general public in the aftermath of a mass shooting. Number 1, those who commit violent crimes are angry, marginalized people with mental disturbances. Number 2, mental illness causes gun violence. While these statements can be true in particular instances, the notion that mental illness causes gun violence stereotypes a vast and diverse population of persons diagnosed with psychiatric conditions and oversimplifies the link between violence and mental illness. Public opinion surveys suggest that many people think mental illness and violence go hand in hand. A 2006 US survey, for example, found that 60% of Americans thought that people with schizophrenia were likely to act violently towards someone else, while 32% thought that people with major depression were likely to do so. However, the reality is, more often than not, people with mental disorders do not engage in violent acts against others, and the vast majority of gun violence is perpetrated by non-mentally ill people. In fact, research suggests that most individuals with psychiatric disorders are not violent. Although a subset of people with psychiatric disorders commit assaults and violent crimes, there is very little evidence to support the claim that individuals diagnosed with mental illness are more likely to commit gun crimes. This demonstrates that the fact that we tend to only discuss mental health in a mass shooting context is deeply misleading. Another popular misconception is that mass killings are being done by people with severe mental illness, and if these people were being treated, the mass killings would have been preventable. At present, the legislation in a number of states in America mandates that psychiatrists assess their patients for the potential to commit violent crimes. New York State law, for example, requires mental health professionals to report anyone who is likely to engage in conduct that would result in serious harm to self or others. This is a way to alert the local authorities, who can then take precautionary action and revoke this person's firearms license and confiscate their weapons. However, history suggests that psychiatrists are largely inefficient in this regard. Psychiatric diagnosis is, for the most part, an observational tool, and this means that in and of itself, the diagnosis isn't predictive of violence, and the vast majority of psychiatric patients who fit the profile of recent US mass shooters, so gun-owning, angry, paranoid white men, do not commit crimes. So far, we have concluded that, number one, it isn't true that mentally ill people are most likely to commit violent crimes. And number two, the early diagnosis of mental health problems doesn't necessarily play a crucial role in the prevention of mass killings. So what are the key lessons to take away here? Well, perhaps the fact that instead of being used as a diagnostic tool, psychiatric expertise might be put to better use by encouraging a constructive debate about the complex anxieties, the social constructs, and the blind assumptions that make people fear each other in the first place. Or the fact that psychiatry could help society interrogate what guns mean to everyday people and why people feel they need guns. By addressing these concerns, psychiatry could, ideally, promote more meaningful public conversations on the impact of guns on civic life and on the importance of talking about mental health openly. Thanks for your attention.